Thank you very much, Dr. Burgess. So I think we'll come back to Dr. Burgess. We'll go to Mr. Rushenthaler. You got to put your mic on. Although it's okay if you want to keep it off.
Yeah, I was going to say, Mr. Chairman, that was the most magnanimous thing I think you've done with me on the committee to date, is telling me to unmute. I appreciate it. So thank you. Ranking Member McMorris Rogers, there was a lot of talk about points you made during your testimony. Would you like a chance to expand on your statements or have a rebuttal?
Sure. Well, maybe the Democrats don't want to recognize how costs are increasing, but over the last year, it's pretty dramatic. Even this last week, as I've been around Eastern Washington, I've heard cost increases down at WSU, Washington State University, new building. It's 25% above what they had thought. Millions, new terminals at the airport. They thought that they had accommodated for inflation and increased costs, and it's still going to be significantly higher. And this is real. The cost that people are paying is real, and there's nothing in this bill that is actually going to reduce energy cost, bring down inflation. By spending more money, more taxpayer dollars, that doesn't reduce inflation. And so I wanted to, I'd love to talk a little bit more about the prescription drug price controls that are put in place in this legislation. It's really disappointing that we haven't been able to come together, because we agree, Republicans and Democrats agree that we want to bring down, we recognize we want to bring down the cost of prescription drugs to seniors, to Americans all across this country. And that's why we've worked on bipartisan legislation that would include a cap on out-of-pocket costs. But what this bill does is not negotiation. And that is why I keep coming back to this, because the bill has a statutory ceiling price, which is tied to the drug's non-federal average manufacturing price. But the kicker there is that there's no price floor. So that means, as you think about a political appointee at Health and Human Services, the secretary, they get to decide what that price is going to be, and it could be well below the market value. There's nothing that would prevent them from making it as low as $1 and require companies to accept that price, or pay an excise tax of up to 95% of the gross sales of that product. So yeah, I would just highlight that there is negotiation in Medicare Part D. There's no negotiation between the plans. And if you, the plans negotiate with the manufacturers, if you are in Medicare Part D, if you don't like your plan, then you have choice. What this does is it takes that away at the cost of innovation and breakthroughs and cures, which I outlined earlier, but just devastating at a time when there's so much hope. We all meet with the different disease groups that come to Washington, D.C. and walk the hallways, and they're just so in need and hopeful for research and what it's going to mean for saving lives, improving outcomes, curing diseases. And this legislation, according to many studies and analysis, is going to have a devastating impact on new cures and breakthroughs, which is the most disheartening part of this approach.
Thank you. And then I just want to shift gears and talk about energy a little bit. I know we've heard these claims that the Green New Deal style policies in this bill will actually reduce greenhouse emissions, but it's my understanding that we were actually reducing our emissions just because we had unleashed the natural gas sector of the economy. Do you want to talk about the trade-off where we're declaring war, in essence, on the natural gas sector of energy, while doubling down on failed policies of wind turbines and solar panels?
Thank you. I appreciate the question, because we're having this big debate over the methane emissions reduction program. It targets natural gas. And what has been unleashed in the United States of America because of new technology that has allowed us to capture more abundant natural gas. It has driven the carbon reduction here in the United States of America, and it's the best thing that we could do worldwide to bring down carbon emissions is to unleash natural gas. That is why America today, the United States of America, is leading the world in bringing down carbon emissions more than any other country in the world. At the same time, China's now emitting more carbon than all the rest of the world combined. And what this legislation does is impose fees. Fees are taxes. It's increased cost on natural gas. So the companies that are using, oh, and I also wanted to highlight that many companies in the United States, because we do lead the world in bringing down carbon emissions and we are committed to new technologies, many companies are already capturing methane and voluntarily implementing the technology that will result in us leading the world. But this type of an approach, when you add fees, when you add taxes on natural gas in this instance, it's going to make everything more expensive for American families. Anything that touches natural gas, all of the supply chains, which, that's the price of fuel, the price of fertilizer, food, and it only causes then more inflation. And I am concerned that natural gas is just the tip of the iceberg. There's 180 million Americans that use natural gas to heat their homes, run their appliances. 5.5 million businesses use it for their workplaces. And this bill gives EPA sweeping authority to expand this program, this natural gas tax, to other sectors, including agriculture. There's no guardrails around the EPA, and we've seen the EPA abuse its authority in the past. There's I won't get into that right now, but that's very concerning of me too.
Well, thank you, Ranking Member McMorris Rogers. I appreciate it. Mr. Byer, in your testimony, you were talking about, you were referencing, I think I wrote it down, a small dip in the second quarter, saying that we're not currently in a recession. I'm just curious, how do you define recession?
Well, because there are so many different perspectives on it, the tradition in America for the last many, many decades is to let the National Bureau of Economic Research define when we're in a recession or not. Most economists, as we read every day, see many different signs, most of them signs of strength, including the 528,000 jobs last year, the 0% inflation, the 9.5 million jobs so far, the fact that we have now about 11 million jobs advertised, down a little bit from 11.5 million, which is the most in American history. The ratio of jobs advertised to people looking for jobs is the highest it's ever been in American history. The two pieces that people who think we might be in a recession point to are the very small decreases in GDP in the first and second quarter. The second quarter, by the way, is completely explained simply by the the sell down of inventories, not by consumer spending, which was up almost 6%, or wages, which rose significantly too. So at this point, I think most of us will stick with the National Bureau of Economic Research and say we are not in a recession right now.
Yeah, the group you reference actually called the 2007 recession years after that started. So you can take how helpful that group is on your own account. But would you stipulate that historically a recession has been defined as 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth?
No, I would not stipulate that. I'd say that 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth has been taken as a minimum qualifier for a recession, but not sufficient unto itself. And by the way, every economist I know predicts a third quarter that will be much stronger, which will make the other 2 quarters seem irrelevant.
Yeah, I'm just talking about the definition of recession. It's quite remarkable because the whole time I was learning about this, whether it be in college or even high school, it's always been defined as 2 consecutive quarters of GDP decline. I can read you the definition that I'm pulling from the Oxford Dictionary. It defines recession as a period of temporary economic decline during which trade and industrial activity are reduced generally identified by a fall in GDP in 2 successive quarters. Could you stipulate that that's the Oxford Dictionary definition?
Um, if you're reading from it, sure, but let me emphasize the word generally. You also have to look at the overall economic, what's happening to consumer spending, what's happening to employment, what's happening to labor force participation, and many other things. So when you put generally in, also you have to look at the size of the declines. I mean, we're talking 0.4%, 0.5% 1%. And also you need to know,
Mr. Byer, I
excuse
commend
me.
you with the logistical yoga. Quite remarkable. Mr. Smith, would you like to try to define recession?
Thank you, Representative. I just wish that our colleagues on the other side of the aisle would spend more time focusing on the real issues instead of spending so much effort in titles of bills that don't really represent the bills, are changing and redefining terms. Like this administration trying to redefine a mother as a birthing person. I mean, this is the type of stuff that the American public is so sick of. A representative for the last 75 years, it has been a common definition amongst all economists that when you have 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth, you are in fact in a recession. And you know, this is the same folks on the other side of the aisle that said that we were not having inflation. And then when they did say that we had inflation, they said it was transitory. And then they said it was because of COVID. And then they said it was because of Putin. And now they have a piece of legislation that's all about green energy tax credits for the wealthy. And they have defined it in their title as the Inflation Reduction Act. Let's focus on what's at hand. And if I could, Representative, this bill, the American people sees what's going on. This bill spends $745 billion whenever you look at the budget gimmicks and the fake sunsets. And it spends $745 billion. And what have we heard today is that we've taken polls, and the polls say that the American people want this. Well, I'd like to remind everyone, Representative, that just over a year ago, when they were trying to push through the first reconciliation bill, the American Rescue Plan, back in March, when it passed, March of 2021, we argued their poll numbers on the House floor. They continue to stand up on the House floor saying 64% of Americans want us to pass this $2 trillion bill that is supposed to defeat COVID. But less than 9% of it actually went towards healthcare and putting shots in people's arms. Well, guess what? Once the American people saw what they got in that $2 trillion bill, they weren't happy with it. In December of this year, 21% of Americans said that they benefited from that $2 trillion wasteful bill. But you know what was in that bill, Representative? What was in that bill was gifts to their buddies, their political friends, their donors. $250,000 for pickleball courts in Michigan. $2 million to plant trees in Syracuse, New York. And guess what? They made sure those federal prisoners got $783 million in checks. And who had to pay for it? The American taxpayer, because they have seen inflation go up 13.7% since Joe Biden has taken the oath of office. And that means they're paying more to put food on their table, clothes on their backs, and gasoline in their cars every day. And that's a real cost. $5,900 per family in just an inflation tax is going to cost all Americans this year is what's projected. And that is more than a month's salary. More than a month's salary just because of reckless government spending. And what does this body want to do? They want to try to spin themselves out of an inflation crisis and tax themselves out of a recession. The American people ain't having it, and they're paying attention.
Mr. Smith, I just want to, I'm sorry, Ranking Member Smith, I just want to dive a little deeper into a few points that you made. You know, we keep hearing that this bill is going to benefit the middle and the working class. Yet there's a litany of subsidies for the wealthiest Americans. You touched upon that in your remarks just a minute ago. Would you like to go a little deeper?
Absolutely. And Chairman Brady also hit on it. When you look at a lot of the green tax credits that's in this piece of legislation, more than $250 billion is there to benefit the wealthy. Even Chairman Yarmouth mentioned in his testimony that you can qualify for an electric vehicle tax credit if you make $150,000 a year. Guess what? If you're married, that's $300,000. Let me tell you, I don't know what every district represents, but I can tell you someone who makes $300,000 in the state of Missouri is a 1%er. That is the wealthy of the wealthy. Our family of 4 in Southeast Missouri makes roughly $40,000 a year. So just the tax credits, the electric vehicle tax credits for people making $300,000 a year, the tax credits for people wanting to green up their personal homes, up to $300,000 a year, subsidies for Obamacare, families making up to $300,000 a year. I mean, the list goes on. The large corporations that they say that they dislike so much, billions of dollars to allow them to use tax credits for their green opportunities. The thing about this legislation is that if you follow underneath the command and control of the Democrats and you follow underneath their green policies, you will benefit. But if you're not someone who wants to embrace all their green policies, you're going to face significant tax increases.
Thank you, Ranking Member Smith. Ranking Member McMorris Rogers, I know a few times you've made reference to EVs when you've testified before this committee before. I always find the argument that electronic vehicles are going to reduce carbon emissions to be an absolute red herring because, of course, the energy to power the electric vehicle is coming from usually a coal-burning power plant. So would you like to talk about the EVs, how it relates to these government handouts to the wealthy to get EVs in the ultimate environmental benefit?
Thank you for the question. I think it is a very important point. I would like to see the Energy and Commerce Committee have hearings on the impact of electric vehicles, but we haven't done that yet. And the legislation in front of us is, as my colleague, Mr. Smith, was just pointing out, it's billions and billions of dollars in subsidies to some of the most wealthy in America to buy an electric vehicle. And you know, I'm very concerned about supply chain issues. We are shutting down American energy, making it harder on natural gas, on American energy producers, more taxes, taxes on refineries in the United States, and promoting this agenda, hundreds of billions of dollars to purchase wind, solar, electric vehicles, batteries that come from China. And, you know, you think about the average price of an electric vehicle is more than $60,000. That's way out of reach for most Americans. And less than 1% of the cars on the road today are electric. You know, and this is, just to underscore what Mr. Smith was saying, this is benefiting the most wealthy. My district, the median income in Eastern Washington, in the district that I represent, is $52,000. And the comment that I made about Walmart, the Walmart shopper that is making $52,000 a year ago, they were spending 20% of their income on gas and food. And today it's 50%. That is real. And that is impacting hardworking Americans in Eastern Washington. And this idea that you can just buy an electric vehicle, or that somehow the government paying a big subsidy to people making up to $300,000 to buy an electric vehicle is going to bring down inflation, just doesn't add up to me.
Thank you, Ranking Member McMorris Rogers. I appreciate it. Ranking Member Smith, I want to talk about these IRS agents. As you know, this bill calls for the hiring of 87,000 IRS agents, supposedly to go after billionaires. Do you know how many billionaires there are in the United States off the top of your head, Mr. Smith?
I wouldn't have a clue.
Well, if I
know that I'm not one of them, I can tell you that.
Me either. If I were to tell you that there was just over 700 billionaires in the United States in this current year, would that surprise you?
That sounds about right. Probably. Yeah.
Would you like to take a stab at why we would need 87,000 IRS agents to go after just over 700 billionaires?
I mean, Representative, I would say that the reason why they have spent so much time justifying this $80 billion is because there's a lot of problems with it. And they're starting to figure out the American people don't want $80 billion to go to hire 87,000 new auditors. Let me just also point out, there's been a lot of comments, Representative, about the IRS commissioner that Trump appointed. Well, let's talk about the IRS commissioner that Obama appointed. He just recently said that that $80 billion is 3 times the amount that's needed for the IRS. 3 times as much. So even Obama's IRS commissioner is saying that this is astronomical and that he doesn't see how you could efficiently use this money. And the fact that there's really not a plan of exactly how this money is going to be spent is alarming. However, what we do know, and everyone says the facts are the facts, we know that the stat is that only 4% of this is going to be used for customer service. 4% of the $80 billion will be used for customer service, but 96% goes to enforcement. Enforcement sure sounds like auditors to me. And the folks back home, anytime they get a phone call from the IRS, they're not looking forward to it. And also, another fact is that under this proposal, 700,000 new audits will be targeting those who make less than $75,000 a year. These are facts. Just because these facts may scare you, these are facts. Take the $80 billion out of the bill if you don't like it. Don't fund the IRS $80 billion. Even Obama's IRS commissioner said $25 billion is the most that the IRS would need to be back to the same levels of 2010.
Mr. Reschel,
Thank you, Ranking Member.
Mr. Reschel, can you just suspend?
I'm going to yield back.
Okay. I just
Oh,
wanted.
sure, I was going to yield back, but sure, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I know Ms. McMorris Rogers needs to leave, and so, and I think Congressman Carter is going to come in for her at some point, if not already here, but we're okay with all that, yeah, that's okay.